controversial new House rules package ended up passing yesterday with only 3 no votes against it. We're joined now by one of those no votes, Congressman Khanna. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be back on.
Very glad to have you here. Thank you so much for voting against the package and your advocacy to try to get others to vote against it in advance of it. Could you explain for the audience why you felt you needed to vote no against this rules package?
Well, PAYGO is basically austerity politics. What it means is that you have to balance the budget for every piece of legislation and look for offsets. We know historically that we had an inadequate response to the Great Recession, and we should have had a much bigger stimulus. If we had a bigger stimulus, unemployment would probably have been around 4 or 5% by 2013 or 2014, and we would never have had Donald Trump. We know that Europe had an inadequate response to the Great Recession, which gave rise to far-right movements and created anti-immigrant fervor. It's one of the biggest economic mistakes of recent times. And so why Democrats would want to straitjacket themselves and not have the flexibility to have large public spending in downturns or long-term public investments is just wrong economics. I recommend Paul Krugman's New York Times column that makes this argument better than anyone has, or Stephanie Kelton's work. There isn't a major economist in this country who thinks PAYGO is good policy. And it's a consequential issue of whether we're going to have flexibility in fiscal policy. That's why I oppose the rule. I'm now going to work with Mark Pocan, Pramila Jayapal, and some others to change the statute.
So, Congressman Khanna, this is Ben Mankiewicz. How are you? Nice to talk to you.
Hi, Ben.
You mentioned Stephanie Kelton, and she has a quote here. It's in a Vox piece that the message Democratic leaders are sending is that we as a party, Democrats, stand for fiscal discipline. And while she's criticizing PAYGO, she is literally giving the political argument for it, right? Which is a political argument that is hard to deny the effectiveness of, which is the Republicans run up the deficit and we won't do that. Is that the main barrier that you run up against when you try to convince your colleagues not to support PAYGO?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ben. The two arguments that they give are, well, we're losing a competitive advantage. We've just said that Trump's $1.5 trillion was irresponsible. We need to hammer that point home. And be the party of fiscal responsibility. And the second thing they say is, well, if we don't have this provision, the Republicans will just accuse us of unlimited spending, and we need to show we're responsible. What that misses is two things. First, the Republicans always run on economic growth. They say, well, their tax cuts are going to magically pay for themselves because it's going to produce 3 or 4% economic growth. Of course, it never does. Our policies actually do produce economic growth, investments in education, healthcare infrastructure, but we never make the economic growth argument. Somehow we are left cleaning up the mess the Republicans create, and we don't have progressive policy. And secondly, it's just wrong economics. I mean, it's the only time deficits matter, and Stephanie Kelton has pointed this out, and Krugman points this out, is if you have either high inflation or high interest rates. You have a moment now and over the last 10, 12, 15 years of low interest rates and very, very low inflation. So to be tackling a mythic deficit in this environment is just not good economics.
So you've done a very good job of pointing out some of the likely economic effects of this sort of policy existing and the sort of stated reason that Nancy Pelosi and others in leadership wanted it. But many progressives are frustrated because they believe that the intent was somewhat different, that this could be used in effect to stop bold progressive policies like a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, universal education, those sorts of things from going forward. To what extent do you believe that that sort of thinking did influence the push to have PAYGO in this new rules package?
Well, I do give credit here to Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan, the chairs of the Progressive Caucus, who negotiated with leadership, including the Rules Chairman, a commitment to get a waiver for any of our bills. And Pramila Jayapal specifically got a commitment to get a hearing on Medicare for all. You would think that that's obvious, but we've never, ever had a hearing on Medicare for all before she got that through. So I think, look, some of us challenged the leadership publicly. I think the progressive co-chairs used that to get these commitments on waivers to make sure we will have hearings and votes on these policies. And it's going to be up to us now to make sure that at least leadership holds and honors those commitments.
And so I take it that at this point you do have a fairly high level of confidence that those waivers will exist in 6 months or a year?
I do, and partly because of your program, and partly because you have helped make this an issue that everyone around the country cares about. I had colleagues come to me saying they got 300, 400 phone calls in their office over this issue. And it shows the power of social media. It shows the power of networks like TYT. It shows that politics is as much an outside game as an inside game. So your voice has really mattered, elevated this. And I think in response to all of that, in the leadership of the Progressive Caucus co-chairs, we have gotten these commitments.
That is certainly the hope, and thank you. I do want to talk about a few of the other, I guess, the chips that progressives were able to get in the bargaining over the past couple of weeks, because I saw Representatives Ocasio-Cortez and Jayapal talking about the proportional representation on committees and also stopping the supermajority needed for tax increases in the future. How significant of changes do you think that those are?
The supermajority was a big win, and again, that was Mark Pocan and Jayapal who negotiated that, and it was just a policy requiring a 2/3 majority to raise taxes. I couldn't think of something more misguided. I mean, do you really need 2/3 of Congress to repeal the Trump tax giveaways to the 1% that went on stock buyback? So I'm very glad that that was taken out. The proportional representation, let's see. I mean, I'm not sure we're going to get to the 40%. I hope we do. People can play games. They can join the quote unquote progressive caucus afterwards. And that doesn't mean necessarily they're going to vote progressive. I guess, it's better than nothing. But the key concession, I think, was the getting rid of the 2/3 supermajority.
Yeah, certainly so. Okay, well then we'll be watching those membership rolls for the Congressional Progressive Caucus closely in the near future. I did want to ask you one other question, because since the last time that we spoke on this program, we had not only a switch over to a new Congress with Democratic control, but also a successful Senate move to pull US support for the Saudi war on Yemen. I know that on the House side, you've been pushing for that for some time. In the near future, can we expect that legislation to come again in the House?
Yes, Nancy Pelosi has given me her commitment that we're going to have a vote in January. Let me tell you why this is so consequential. It's actually the work I'm considered the most meaningful in my 2 years here. Yemen is facing a potential famine where 12 to 14 million people could die in the next few months. To put this in perspective, the last famine of this proportion was in West Bengal in 1943, where 3 million people died. I mean, this is a humanitarian catastrophe on scales unimaginable. And it's happening for one single reason. The Saudis are bombing the port of Hodeidah. And as a result of that bombing, food and medicine isn't getting in to Yemen. We have enough food, we have enough medicine, we just can't get it to the Yemenis people. And there's hyperinflation there. People can't afford it because of this bombing. And the US has been assisting the Saudis in the bombing. We were refueling their planes, we were assisting in targeting, we were assisting in logistics. The administration, because of the pressure that Senator Sanders and I have been putting for the last 2 years and the resolutions we were introducing, finally said that they were going to suspend the refueling. But Congress needs to go further. We need to make it clear we want no support to the Saudis for this war. We know that the coalition is paying attention. After the Senate passed their resolution, Mattis called the coalition and said, you've got to get to the negotiating table. We can't have another embarrassment in Congress. I believe when we pass this resolution in the House and then again in the Senate, it's going to help stop this war, and it's going to reassert Congress's role for a less interventionist foreign policy and a foreign policy that privileges human rights. And I just want to credit again the grassroots activists around this country. This was an issue that the leadership was not paying attention to. They spoke out on this. They called members of Congress. That's how we've made any change.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, certainly long overdue, and I hope that your legislation is successful. Congressman, I want to thank you again for joining us on the show.
Thanks for always having me back, and great to be both with you and Ben.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today for more exclusive content Join now at tyt.com/join.